The second you meet someone, your brain is already on the case. It's gathering clues, forming theories, and trying to figure out who this person is. This whole process, it's called person perception. And really, it's just the nonstop detective work our minds are doing every single day to make sense of our social world. So, how good of a detective are you? Let's dig in and find out. You know that feeling, right? You meet someone new and boom, within seconds, you just know something about them. Is it some kind of superpower? Well, not exactly. In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on our own minds and see what's actually happening during those instant judgments. All right, so our investigation starts with the first clues, those incredibly fast, almost automatic gut feelings we get. These are really the building blocks of our first impressions, and our brains are just wired to collect them at lightning speed. Now, one of the very first tools our brain grabs for is stereotyping. And look, I know that's a loaded word, but if we look at it just from a cognitive angle, it's a shortcut. By putting someone into a category we already know, our brain can instantly pull up a mental file of associated traits. It gives us a quick, even if it's a flawed, playbook for how to react. And this is exactly where it gets so complicated. See, on the one hand, stereotyping is super efficient. It saves our brain a ton of energy on these initial judgments so we can focus on other stuff. But, and this is a huge but, the downside is massive. These shortcuts are often just flat out wrong. They totally ignore who the person is as an individual, and they are the cognitive root of prejudice. So, beyond these broad categories, we're also speed reading nonverbal cues all the time. Facial expressions, especially for big emotions like fear or happiness, are pretty much universal. Eye contact? Well, it can signal connection and love or a direct aggressive challenge. And get this, research even shows that we interpret body movements based on their shape. Angular, sharp motions read as threatening, while smoother, rounded ones feel warmer and safer. Okay, so we've gathered our initial clues. But any good detective knows you don't just stop at the surface. The next step is to take all these little bits of information and start building them into a more complete personality profile. And this leads to a really crucial question. When you're forming an impression, do all the little details carry the same weight? Like, if I tell you someone is intelligent, skillful, and cautious, do you value all those words equally? Well, as it turns out, the answer is a big fat no. So check this out. In a classic study from way back in 1946, a researcher named Solomon Asch gave people one of these two lists and asked them to describe the person. Now look closely. The lists are identical except for one single word: warm versus cold. And the difference in the final impressions people formed, it was huge. The warm person was seen as generous and happy, but the cold person, not so much. This amazing experiment revealed what Asch called central traits. These are words that don't just add another detail to the picture, they fundamentally change the meaning of everything else. I mean, think about it. Being determined sounds great in a warm person, right? But in a cold person, determined might come across as ruthless. These central traits act like a sun, and all the other traits just orbit around them. Okay, so we've started to figure out what a person is like, anchored by those really powerful central traits. But a detective's work isn't just about profiling. It's also about motive. The next big question is always why. We are absolutely obsessed with figuring out why people do the things they do. Let's use a real-life example to make this concrete. Picture this. There's a huge storm, and your trash doesn't get picked up. So you call the local association to complain, and the person on the other end of the line is just shockingly rude and sarcastic. Your immediate thought is probably, wow, what a jerk. But is that the whole story? This, right here, is the core question our brain is trying to solve. Are we dealing with a permanent part of their personality? Is this person just fundamentally rude? Or was their behavior caused by the situation? Maybe their office was flooded, maybe they've been dealing with hundreds of angry calls all morning. So psychologists have a name for this process. They call it attribution. When you decide the agent is just a jerk, you're making an internal attribution. You're blaming something inside them, their personality. But if you think, well, their office probably flooded, you're making an external attribution. You're blaming the situation. The path we choose here completely changes how we see and interact with people. And now for the big twist in the case. Just when we think we're being this fair, objective detective, it turns out our whole process is riddled with biases. Our judgments are systematically skewed by these mental shortcuts that, well, they aren't always logical. It turns out the order in which we get information matters a lot. It's called the primacy effect, and it means that the first things we learn about someone have a much bigger impact on our overall view. This is why first impressions are so critical in things like job interviews. It's only when we're consciously told to hold off on making a judgment that the most recent info, the recency effect, can sometimes win out. I mean, take this experiment. It's pretty wild. Two people get the exact same score on a test, 15 out of 30. But the person who started strong and then faded was seen as smarter than the person who started out poorly but finished strong. That early information created this mental idea of intelligence that was just really hard to shake, even with new evidence. And here's another huge bias we all have, the negativity bias. Our brains are basically like Velcro for bad stuff and Teflon for good stuff. Hearing that someone is kind, funny, and dishonest leaves a totally different taste in your mouth than dishonest, kind, and funny, even though the words are the same. A single negative trait can spoil the whole bunch. So why are we wired this way? Well, it probably comes down to survival. For our ancestors roaming the savannah, failing to notice a threat, like a predator hiding in the grass, was a much, much bigger mistake than failing to notice something positive, like a friendly face. Our brains are literally hardwired to be on high alert for danger. So what's the final report from our investigation? What have we learned? We've seen that how we judge others is this really complex mix of super fast shortcuts, some careful consideration, and a whole lot of powerful, often invisible biases. Look, understanding all these mental glitches isn't about trying to stop them. You can't. They're a fundamental part of how our brains work. The real goal here is just awareness. By knowing that we tend to jump to conclusions, or that we focus on the negative, we can start to second-guess our own gut feelings. We can pause and ask ourselves, am I judging the person or am I judging the situation? Is my first impression coloring everything else I learn? And that right there is the first step to becoming a better and a fairer social detective.